morning. Welcome to the first session of Africa Week's co-located workshops on the fourth day of Africa Week. I'm Ann Peterson, research professor in integrated systems design in the College of Engineering here at the University of Michigan, and I will be moderating this session. We're very excited to be part of University of Michigan's Africa Week, celebrating the partnerships beginning more than 50 years ago with institutions and colleagues from almost all countries in Africa, including most fields of study. University of Michigan values co-created and co-implemented partnerships. From my Africa partners, I learned the mutuals for partnerships: mutual respect, mutual responsibility, mutual interest, and mutual benefit. We have an outstanding group of speakers here with us today. Brian Arbic and Eileen Cattell from the University of Michigan, with the other three originally or currently from Africa: Charles Ichoku from Howard University, George Philander of Princeton University and University of Cape Town, and Lila Gifty Akita, University of Ghana. Our topic is extremely important for science and innovation partnerships: the importance of networks for US-Africa STEM collaborations. STEM fields are driven by networks. The research on networks suggests that they speed research knowledge sharing and are especially effective when they extend more broadly and diversely. Networks have proven to be highly effective for advancing research between minority world countries such as the US and majority world countries such as those in Africa. All participants gain from those networks. In addition, research suggests that younger scholars, both students, which we emphasize in this session, and early career scholars benefit even more than senior scholars. We believe that Africa is central to the most important scientific questions of our times, including pandemics such as COVID-19, climate change, among others. We're excited to be sharing information from several US-Africa networks. I've asked panelists to share fun facts about themselves and begin by offering mine. As you have likely noticed, I love African art, including wearable art. We have 5 presenters on this panel, so we'll proceed through the presentations, leaving time at the end for questions. You may enter your questions in the Q&A. Our first presenter is Brian Arbic, who will speak to a STEM core to strengthen US-African education and research collaborations. Brian is a professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Michigan. And Brian's fun fact is that while the rest of us in Michigan are in extremely cold weather now, where he grew up is even colder in the Upper Peninsula. Brian.
Thanks very much, Ann, and thanks so much for having me. Let me see, I'm going to try to share my screen. I think that's working. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. All right. So yes, I'm going to speak about an idea for a STEM core to strengthen US and African education and research collaborations. And that is based upon our experience with the Coastal Ocean Environment Summer School in Ghana, COSING, and the website is here. And this picture in the background is from the 2018 Ghana Summer School in Oceanography. So what led us to this point, and what can be learned from that journey about how to expand such efforts? Well, I'm a product of the University of Michigan. I got my bachelor's degree here a long time ago. And after I graduated, I joined the Peace Corps. And some of you may know that JFK announced his idea of the Peace Corps on the steps of the University of Michigan Student Union during a campaign stop. And by coincidence, when I came back to Michigan as a faculty member, it was in 2010, right around the time that everyone was preparing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps. A remarkable coincidence for me and it matters for the story in a bit. So first, I'd just like to talk about why the Peace Corps worked for someone like me. It provided infrastructure so that someone like me, a recent college graduate who wanted to go to Africa, was able to do it. Peace Corps was a huge adventure for me for lots of reasons that you can probably imagine. But going on my own would have been too much of an adventure and a logistical challenge to pull off. If I had to pick a school to teach at and figure out how I was going to get paid and kept healthy and all that stuff, I just wouldn't have been able to do it most likely. So the point is, it provided infrastructure to get someone like me over there to engage and to hopefully help out a little bit. And that will be important to my idea of a STEM Corps. So here's a picture of me with some of the students that I taught. There I am in the middle, and the arrows are pointing at some of the students I knew particularly well, especially Joseph Ansong. Now, there was no internet back then, and so after I left, pretty quickly, I lost touch with everyone that I knew in Ghana. And 16 years went by, and then because the internet was more common at that point, they started writing me and saying, "How are you doing? This is how we're doing." And I found out that Joseph Ansong was getting a PhD with someone I know in Canada in a field that was close to mine, so networks. So by total coincidence, we had ended up in similar fields. These are the first emails that we exchanged after 16 years of no contact. Here's a picture of me when I brought him to Michigan for that 50th Peace Corps anniversary. And then I hired him into my laboratory, and he worked there for several years before returning to Ghana as a faculty member. We still collaborate together on this school that I'll talk about and other things. And Michigan did some stories about our reunion. Here's a picture of him in my group shortly before he returned to Ghana. Well, with Joseph in our lab, we decided we did want to start this oceanography summer school. It alternates between Regional Maritime University, which trains people for maritime careers such as shipping, and University of Ghana, where Lila Gifty Akita is from. They have a marine science department that she's in. So the first year we went, it was pretty small. We were just figuring things out. We only had 4 people from the US, including Joseph and another person, Ebenezer, originally from Ghana. We only gave lectures, and the number of African participants was also fairly small. And then one of my colleagues, Adam Simon, said, "Hey, I'd like to go to Africa, and I think University of Michigan has some pots of funding we could tap into, including from the Africa Studies Center, that could help us expand the school." And that worked. So for a couple of years, we were funded by various pots from University of Michigan. And that allowed us to greatly expand the school to 15 Americans, including 6 Michigan students, and about 100 Africans. And with all that extra energy, we expanded what we were doing, not just lectures, but trips to the beach and laboratory exercises. And then we keep expanding. The following year, we took boat trips and the students deployed instruments. And the year after that, we had one-on-one research projects. And the year after that, we had more of these research projects, and people presented their results. Many of them said it was the first time they've been able to do such a presentation. So we have a page of testimonials on the impact of the school. There's lots of people on there from the US and Africa. I'll just highlight a couple of them. Nefertiti Smith is now a PhD student at UC Irvine, but the first time she came to our school, she was an undergraduate at a historically Black college and university called Hampton. And she said, "People of color need to be represented in the scientific community. Global issues require people around the world to work together. The most important takeaway I learned from this program is that it is possible." And so she's still working with us on the school, and we're thrilled to have her. And here's a testimonial from Ogun Sola, a participant from Nigeria, who said, "Working in the research project track was a turning point. Really enjoyed working with the tutor, Maddie Foster Martinez, a young scientist in New Orleans. And they modeled the trend in sea level rise, made a presentation, benefited immensely." So we have, again, a lot of testimonials that this school is working for people. Now, of course, in 2020, we had to go virtual because of COVID. And so we have lots of pictures like this. Here's George Philander, who's going to be talking later in this panel. We had workshops on African perspective on global warming. That's from George. Women in STEM, that was led by Aline Cotel, who will be talking later in this panel. And we used YouTube and Slack and stuff like that. We still managed to pull off a school with lots of participants despite COVID. Well, so many people have worked to make this school possible. And just to give you an idea, so these are the two institutions we work with in Ghana. And these people listed are our main collaborators and co-organizers. Lila Gifty Akita, who will be speaking later, is one of them. And red means that they've participated more than once. So we have a core of regular participants and organizers. And then from the global north, from 2015 to 19, we have lots of people, faculty, research scientists, postdocs, grad students, undergrads. Again, red means more than once, lots of regular participants. And these folks here are people who change jobs once or twice as they participated in our school. All right, so they came because the school existed. This is the analogy to the Peace Corps. Many of these Global North participants had never been to Africa before participating in the school. And if they had to make the school from scratch, it probably wouldn't have happened. But if the school exists, then it's relatively easy for them to participate, and they do it. So again, that's the analogy to the Peace Corps. You need a few people to set things up, and then it will draw lots of interest. And when you go online, that's even more the case, because then people can participate a few hours online. They don't need to travel. So we got a whole bunch more people from the global north, including George and George Philander and Charles Achoku, who will both be speaking later today. So every time I talk about the Ghana School, more people ask to join. Especially young scientists in the US and Europe are super interested in doing something like this. And people from other countries would like to host summer schools. We have Nigerians and Jamaicans saying they really want it. The interest is there for expansion, and I think you need a unifying concept. And so my pitch for that is a STEM Corps. If you had something like a STEM Corps, like a Peace Corps, but at a research level, then what we're doing with the Ghana School could be multiplied many times over. You could have 10 oceanography schools around the world, 20. Just depends on funding. That part maybe you could call an Ocean Corps, and that concept has been accepted by the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which has just started. But more generally, go beyond oceanography, material science, renewable energy, data science, public health. You could call that a STEM Corps. And I'm almost done. I would say that networks that also serve groups that are underrepresented in the US would be more likely to attract substantial US funding. We're already collaborating with Howard. Charles is evidence of that, and also Hampton. And my last slide, I think the benefits of a STEM Corps, if we could establish something like this, you just get so many more people engaged in working in places like Africa. You'd lower the activation barrier for busy STEM researchers to participate, internationalize the US research community, get people interested in capacity development, diversify the global STEM community, and perhaps most importantly, develop real collaborations between the US and global South. We have publications already coming out of what we're doing in Ghana, for instance. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Brian. Really a very exciting idea. And I should note that Brian Arbuck and Aline Cotel organized this session. Brian kindly thanked me, but I want to be sure that they receive the credit for putting together this outstanding session. Our next presenter is Charles Achoku, who is Professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences, Department of Interdisciplinary Studies, Distinguished Scientist in the NOAA Cooperative Science Center in Atmospheric Sciences and Meteorology. And he's from Howard University. Charles is speaking about networks of observations and scientists for Environmental and Climate Research in Africa. And his fun fact is that taking both his names, Charles Ichoku, he has all the letters of the alphabet in the correct order. Charles.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all see my screen. So I'm going to be talking about networks of observations and scientists for environmental research in Africa. The image you're looking at is a satellite image that shows the hurricane Isaias that we heard about some time ago, traveling from Africa to the United States. So there are many connections between these two continents. So my interest in actually conducting, well, before I started at Howard University about 2.5 years ago, I spent 20 years at NASA. So one time I saw this publication here that you see at the top, where the rain band across this middle part of Africa was broad, was very wide in the pre-industrial era, and then had narrowed to a very narrow band in the 1980s and moving forward to now. So there was a title that, although we have been scratching our heads thinking about climate change, a lot of people died during the droughts of the 1970s and 1980s. So this attracted my attention, and I thought I need to do something scientifically in Africa. So you will see this lake Chad here in the very center of this northern part of Africa. So in the 60s and 70s, that lake was full of water. Then it suddenly, during the drought era, dried significantly, and you have only this little segment, this little pool of water here in the southern part, and it has not recovered even up till now. So in order to engage and start some scientific engagement with Africans in Africa, I contacted some of our colleagues, and I was introduced to this organization called WASCAL. It's a climate organization, funded by the German government, but it's located in, it's taking care of West Africa. There's a similar organization in Southern Africa. So I reached out to these organizations in order to collaborate with them in carrying out research to try to diagnose what's happening with the rain situation and other climate influences in Africa, West Africa being one of them. We conducted research funded by NASA over several years, and during that time, I had some interchange with we as a group now, because we wrote a proposal, myself and several other people from various institutions here in the United States to NASA, and we were funded. So we conducted a very intensive research during something like 6-7 years. And during that time, we had a lot of exchanges. You'll see one of the occasions where we received visiting scientists from African institutions who are affiliated with WASCAL here at NASA Goddard, where I was at the time. Toward the end of that engagement, we organized a capacity building workshop. We were funded by COSPAR. We submitted a proposal. So I called in 3 other people from the US. You will see them here, 3 from Europe and 2 from West Africa. And we coordinated a capacity building workshop for people around West Africa. Here are many graduate students and professors from West Africa who attended that conference from about 9 countries of West Africa. I'm still in communication with some of those students who graduated. Many of them are now postdocs and doing other things. So during that period, we decided to, we were looking for, because we were using satellite data and modeling to study the various phenomena related to the environmental change and the impacts on the water cycle. We did not have much ground-based observations to validate what we were doing, or to even initialize the models. So we decided to set up a few observations on the ground. We went to the Lake Chad Basin, set up a few weather stations, soil moisture probes, and groundwater meters. And when we said the first one, if you see the picture on the top right here on the right side, the first time we set up this automated weather station in Chad, that was the first of its kind in Central Africa. So it was a big news, and the news people, the TV people came and they filmed us and interviewed us here, as you can see here. So we set up just a few of them, not too many, 6 stations to collect data. Those measurements are still there going on and collecting observations. So some of our reasons for doing that were to use the measurements to initialize, parameterize our models, and to understand the situation in the Lake Chad Basin, what's going on there. Based on what we understand there, we can then go forward and understand the processes and the the exchange of energy and water cycle in that region, the interactions and feedbacks. We utilize what we learned there to study the entire region. And then we use the measurements as well to validate and evaluate our models. So something you see here is what the map you're looking at is, these are the hurricane tracks from the 1800s to the present. You will see the Atlantic hurricane tracks. You will see that most of them start at the up the coast of West Africa and head toward the United States. So this is a very great link. So we wanted to, we know that forecasters need to improve the predictions of these hurricanes, but there is great need for ground-based measurements. So in order to do that, we have submitted a proposal, which is still being reviewed now at NSF, to try to enhance the models that forecast hurricanes by establishing some ground-based networks here. So during that proposal development, we collaborate with a lot of institutions in West Africa. Brian is part of that proposal. And so we're still waiting and hoping that it will be selected so we can go there and densify the ground-based observation that can help us to better predict hurricanes crossing the Atlantic to come to the United States and the Caribbean. So this is a map of what some of what exists there at the moment, but they do not have the vertical profiling capability at the moment. So that's what we are proposing, to add some ground-based observations, but also at these sites where you see the aircraft, we want to launch balloons to profile the atmosphere, and also put some LiDARs to actually, it's called ceilometer, to look at the vertical profile of the atmosphere, which will help us to improve the modeling. Now we went into another, we are studying the coastal regions of West Africa. So we have created recently what we call a U.S. West Africa Atlantic Coastal Resilience Research Consortium. So it's a group of, we have monthly meetings to brainstorm and talk and plan and strategize on various kinds of opportunities and collaborative research activities that we can engage in together. So basically how do you say, the bottom line is that it's not easy to do, to make an effective impact in research, especially things relating to climate and regional phenomena by yourself. We need networks of not only scientists, but also ground-based observations. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Very exciting set of collaborations on extremely important topics. Our next speaker is George Philander, who's Professor Emeritus, Princeton University and University of Cape Town. And he's going to be talking about using global warming to promote interest in STEM. But first I have to tell you his fun fact, which is a little long. Stay with me. In the summer of 1967, he joined his advisor at UCLA for sabbatical And at the next desk was a beautiful woman from Argentina who spoke Spanish, and between George with he came from South Africa, his accent, they could not communicate. A few months later, when he was ready to go back, he asked her to join him in going back to Boston with him. She said only if they would get married. So they did. 53 years later, his lesson learned for life is that it's good to make spontaneous decisions. So spontaneous George, take it away.
Thank you, Anne. Let me start with a picture, which is a quote from an essay that Abraham Flexner wrote in 1939. And he starts out this essay saying, "Is it not a curious fact that in a world steeped in irrational hatreds, which threaten civilization itself, men and women, old and young, detach themselves from the angry current of daily life to devote themselves to the cultivation of beauty. To the extent,
George, we
yes?
can't see your slides.
Oh, you cannot. I have to press a button somewhere. Oh, okay. Is that better?
Do you see the share screen at the bottom? The green
I just
minus-
pressed that, yeah.
Okay, we're not seeing it yet. There we go.
Okay. Okay, I was reading that sentence basically, and he concludes that although some people devote themselves to the cultivation of beauty, to the extension of knowledge, to the cure of disease, just as though fanatics were not simultaneously engaged in spreading pain, ugliness, and suffering. Now, this opening sentence of Flexner's article in 1939 is as relevant today as it was then. But the problems we currently face are very different from a world war between opposing forces. One of the big problems we face is global warming, and it's a consequence of our collective activities. To do something about global warming, we have to address ethical questions beyond the scope of science. For example, what is the appropriate balance between our obligation to future generations and our responsibilities to those suffering today, those living in abject poverty?
George, could you put your slides in presentation mode?
You cannot see them?
We can see them, but just put it. Yeah, you just need to start yeah. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Anyway, my main point is that science has severe limitations, that it can tell you how things work, but it cannot tell you how to live your life. And when Galileo got into an argument with the Pope, he pointed out to the Pope that science tells us how the heavens go, but not how to go to heaven. And the world of science is a very cold, calculating one. If you tell me that 2 + 2 is equal to 5, and I insist that 2 + 2 is equal to 3, we can split the difference and get the right answer. But that is not how science works. Science has strict rules, and for that reason is profoundly different from the world of human affairs, where compromise is a requisite, compassion is a virtue. A response to global warming has to bridge this gulf between the two worlds and requires that everyone should have some familiarity with the powerful methods of science and with its severe limitations. And that is why global warming is an ideal vehicle for an introduction to STEM. Our current strategy for dealing with global warming is proving inadequate. The focus on imminent gloom and doom and on adaptation and mitigation of disasters causes children to get depressed, adults to feel hopeless. To tell those living in abject poverty that the future will be worse is cruel. we should be responsible stewards of planet Earth and take care of planet Earth, not out of fear of disasters, but because of love for our remarkable planet. This is the only one known to be habitable. So the first step is to remind everyone of what astronaut Alan Shepard said when he first saw the Earth from the moon. And his comment was the one, you can read it on the right-hand side, and I have it obscured by something. But anyway, the key point is that when he first looked at the Earth from the moon, he cried. And it's a very moving picture. It tells you that we living on this fragile spaceship with a very precious cargo, and we traveling through inhospitable space. We receive nothing but sunlight. And so the question that this picture poses is, how does Earth maintain a climate that permits us to flourish, especially our species? For an answer, we should inspect Earth's glorious diversity of climatic zones. And what you see in this picture, you see jungles and deserts, tundra, and you also see that the ocean is divided into climatic zones. And what ties them together is recycling. Each of us, including the lady with the dog here on the beach in Cape Town, we inhale oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide. Where we get the oxygen is we depend on plants. Plants do the reverse. The plants absorb carbon dioxide and they provide us with oxygen. And in the same way that each climatic zone in this picture has very distinctive plants, animals, nonetheless, they're all connected. And it's because of this recycling. Everything gets recycled: water, oxygen, carbon dioxide. In effect, no man is an island. We are all interdependent. We can only take care of the planet collectively through cooperation. For several years now, Brian and I have organized science workshops, he in Ghana, myself in South Africa, and it's intended for undergraduates to persuade them to continue with graduate studies. These workshops are remarkably successful, judging by student evaluations, mainly because of a great diversity of students from different economic and social backgrounds are encouraged to question and to challenge assumptions about the amazing world around them. To that end, the docents and leaders of field trip are also students or young faculty members, and they encourage the students to question, to challenge. The workshops are very successful, but unfortunately accommodate relatively few students. In the case of South Africa, there are now 6 a year, each attended by 30 students. We'd like to increase this number significantly, and we propose to offer workshops online and to focus on the global climate change everybody experiences, namely the seasons. The splendid NASA picture you see there is but a snapshot of a panorama that changes with great regularity. Summer is warmer than winter. If you ask most people why that's the case, they don't know. To answer that question, students in Accra and Cape Town, under the guidance of Brian's student, Joseph Ansong, is now a professor, and Carl Palmer in Cape Town, the students of those 2 cities will exchange data such as the length of their shadows at noon, the temperature at noon, over a period that covers a solstice or an equinox. You can imagine what an introduction this will be to the reasons for the seasons. The students will exchange videos to discover how different their seasons are. The seasonal cycle in Ghana is very, very different from the one in Cape Town. Is it possible for students, just by means of the web, to find out? Our hope is that this project will motivate similar projects in other pairs of cities. One can imagine any number of cities across the globe chosen on the basis of that map. So I would very much appreciate any suggestions you may have. In conclusion, I have a picture, or a group of pictures that gives you an idea of what goes on in Cape Town. It's just a beautiful city. This is the island where Mandela was imprisoned for more than 20 years. That's the view we had. Cape Town is built around this mountain, and its diversity is enormous in plants, also in people. Some live in slums. This one just literally over there has no running water, no electricity at Skyleche. Several 100,000 people live there. On the other hand, this is the affluent part of Cape Town. The people who live in those fancy apartments, many of them own yachts. It's quite possible that in our workshop, the students coming down Table Mountain over here, they go up with balloons, thermometers, the balloons expand and so forth. It's quite possible that this girl over there or this one here is from this part of town, and that the one next to her is from that part of town. And this experience is an enormous one. It makes a huge impression on the children. Under apartheid, this would not have been possible. If you do go to Cape Town, I would submit that one of the biggest rewards is to discover the plants, that the world's plant kingdom is the world's plants are divided into 6 kingdoms. Cape Town has one all to itself. Here you see some of those. So I'd appreciate any suggestions as to how Brian and I can increase the number of groups participating in this discovery of why we have seasons, why summer is warmer than winter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, for that inspiring presentation. Our next speaker is one of those who organized this session, Eileen Cattell, who's the Arthur F. Thurnau Professor in Civil and Environmental Engineering and the Program in Environment at the University of Michigan. She's an honorary professor in civil engineering at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa, and a faculty advisor for international programs in engineering. And her fun fact is that she's a weaver who loves African textiles. Eileen.
Thank you, Anne. So I will share my screen and we'll get going. So I'm going to follow the previous speaker and talk about increasing diversity also in STEM, but from a gender perspective. And so some of the work I've been doing is trying to increase the number of women in engineering and science in general. So I'll just mention a few networks that I've been involved with, going from students-based network to more academic and professional network. So the first one that's really dear to my heart, and it really started my involvement with Africa at the University of Michigan, was LSWE, which is a Liberian Society of Women Engineers. And that really started through a grant that the University of Michigan had from USAID that was to help rebuild the higher education system in Liberia, both in engineering and agriculture. And the students that participated in summer camps and so on, helped teaching in the summer, they really started brainstorming with their Liberian counterpart, and they decided that they wanted to create some kind of professional organization focused on women. The women at the University of Liberia felt they didn't really have a good place to mentor each other and create a community. And so the students really started this from the ground up, and it started in 2013. They decided to use SWE, which is the Society for Women Engineers, as the professional umbrella. And so when they created the student chapter, it actually was the first student chapter of SWE in Africa. And one of the other components that we leveraged to get funding and get things going was also thinking about engineering education. And the idea is really to benefit both community of students, both the U of M students as well as the Liberian students, and to create this community across borders, not just in Liberia, but really having this equal partnership in the professional organization. So what ensued from that is creating an annual camp. So as you can see from the date, we started in 2013, 2014 was Ebola. So our first camp was delayed. And so, but we've had a physical camp in Liberia every summer after that, except of course with COVID, we had a virtual camp in 2020, probably 2021 as well. But the idea of this leadership camp is to bring both sets of students together, It includes students from the University of Liberia, but not only. So other students around Monrovia, students that can from Cottington University, which is a little bit further. Everybody's welcome to the camp. The camp is taught by the students, and so they, the grad students are the mentor for the undergrad, but they design the workshop, they teach the workshop. The Liberian students are also involved in teaching. At the beginning of this whole enterprise, there was a lot of work going into the student organization part, because our SWE chapter at U of M, both undergrad and grad, are just outstanding, and they're super organized. So they were helping the Liberian SWE understand the structure, being able to leverage resources, creating outreach activities, and so on. So since then, we've shifted the focus a little bit more on academic and professional development skills. There's lots of mentoring opportunities, as I mentioned, and we also try to help the Liberian students apply for graduate school. So far, just a few deliverable from this. We've published some peer-reviewed conference proceedings. There's other manuscripts in preparation. We've had Liberian students come to the annual SWE conference in the US, as well as the Engineering Education Annual Conference. And we had our first LSWE students admitted to U of M in a master's program last year, but with COVID, she's delayed her admission. And when talking to Professor Ophelia Weeks, who used to be the former president of the University of Liberia, she thought we had an impact with eHealth in doubling the number of female engineering students at the University of Liberia. So this is just one model where the students really created the structure. I've just been an advisor. I just watched them do their magic, and they're just outstanding. And so I just wanted to switch gear a little bit and talk about a different kind of model, where this is, I was a co-founder of this Women Water Nexus, which goal is to create research collaboration between scholars from all over the place. And I just wanted to mention this because the way this works is really leveraging existing resources to be able to bring scholars from other places. So we've had 3 women from Jordan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, receive a Visiting International Fellow Award through an ASC, so American Society of Civil Engineers conference. And so we were trying to be organized and compete for those. So I think having the Nexus help those women apply for those awards was really helpful and productive. And then beyond going to the conference, we each organized, so leveraging our own universities, we were able to offer seminars and offer meetings with other scholars in their respective fields. So they really could get a good impact from their visit for the annual meeting. And as some of the things that have ensued from that are courses being taught in Jordan between University of Washington and JUST in Jordan, and students from University of Washington and JUST are working together on projects. We've had some NSF Peers Grant funded and some publication. The main publication is really to explain the framework. But that's been really productive, even though focused on research. And just a couple more. My goal is to just going to show some existing network, and then we can brainstorm also when we have the Q&A, but just looking at different models. So this is one network that's close to my heart. We started this about 10 years ago. This is my research area. I'm in fluid dynamics, and typically there's very few women. And 10 years ago at breakfast, there's 6 of us, and we're like, we should really do something about this. And so we started creating this annual luncheon. And the idea is really to network and create a community for the women in fluid mechanics. And we welcome men, as long as we're all trying to promote women and visibility of people's work in our community. And if we increase our membership from the 7 of us at breakfast 10 years ago to hundreds of people. It's now an integral part of the annual meeting of the Division of Fluid Dynamics, American Physical Society. And mentoring is a big deal, but also trying to also make sure that job opportunities on everybody's radar. And this particular network is really focusing on mentoring from undergrad, interested in the field, to senior women in academia, industry, national lab. And some of the impact we hope we can see is that just looking at the number of fellows in our division, that we used to, prior to 2018, would have 0 or 1 woman once in a while get recognized as a fellow. And since 2018, we've had half of the fellows being women. So I think it really helps bring visibility to the work of the Women in Network. I'll just mention, I probably be careful with time here, but a couple of the organizations that the students and the faculty that participate in COASING that Brian mentioned at the beginning are more focused on physical oceanography. And I think the main theme from all these different organizations like Empower Us Swims is the mentoring aspect and creating a community for women in science and engineering. And so by creating this community, I think we can really help mentor and increase the participation of women in our fields. So in terms of next step, I just chose those three to go a little deeper to show that there's really a wide range of model that we can choose from. And I think, you know, we don't need to recreate the wheel. We can also leverage what's existing and really encourage African scholars to become member of those organizations. And I think if some of them require fees, there's always the issue of funding, but we can also create a structure where there's fee waivers for African scholars, for example. I mean, as we've been zooming around for the last year or so, and I think it was mentioned by Charles, we can leverage virtual workshop and meeting, but I'm for one really enjoy meeting people in person. So I think virtual meetings are great, but we've been talking about trying to use COASING as an anchor to create a physical workshop and meeting in West Africa the next time we offer COASING in person. Some of the things I want to also work on is partnership with European entities so we can increase access to other institutions besides just US-based institution. And that's already been mentioned, so that we're all working on those type of things. And you know, some of the things I just wanted to wrap up with is that our students, our U of M students, get super excited when they go to Liberia, for example, and work on the workshop, and they really want their Liberian friends to come to U of M for graduate school. But then it gets really hard. So some of the students now, I think we're getting a pipeline where students can be admitted, but the cost of attending U of M for a master's is really prohibitive. And I think that's some of the brainstorming that needs to happen also on this side is how we can, you know, help students, especially for masters, because for PhD, we have the fully funded model, so that's not applied, but it's very hard for an African student to be able to manage the cost of a master's at a place like U of M. So that's some of the thing I think we can work on, and we can talk more in the Q&A at this point. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eileen. A topic near and dear to my heart, and you have so many important examples. The last speaker among our panels is Dr. Lila Gifty Akita, who is a lecturer in the Department of Marine and Fishery Science at the University of Ghana. She's going to be speaking about Network of African Women in Marine Science. Networks are necessary. Lila, welcome. Lila, we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, good.
Okay, the professors have spoken, and I would like to start with a quote by Isaac Newton. If I have seen further, it is by standing upon the shoulders of the giant. I've met Brian several times during the summer school, that's COSI. He talks about COSI. And I've also met Professor Philander and Ichuku and some of the panelists during the last summer. Networks are very necessary. Why? We are talking about network of African women in marine science. Marine science is a really multidisciplinary area, and the science of marine is dominated by men. We want to know how could we help young women in marine science, and my colleague and I, Dr. Edem Mao. So there are a lot of network, but why is network essential, or why is network needed? Network is needed for career connections, for scientific community to appreciate cultural diversity in our society, for collaborations. These are the essence of network. Network is also important for career development, to create job opportunities, for sharing information. With the African Network of Marine Science, it is yet to be developed. We want to encourage young women to pursue marine science. We want to empower young women in Africa to get involved. We want to act as a role models or mentoring for young people in Africa. There are lots of networks which we would like to share. For instance, Professor Kotel talked about Society for Women in Marine Science. We have just joined the Society for Women in Marine Science during last year's summer school, was the virtual one. We want to connect with them so that together we can develop the network for African women in marine science. There are a lot of networks which you can read about. There is a network of women in marine science, Women Marine Scientists by UNESCO, Women in Ocean Science, Leading Women in Marine Science, Women in Marine Science and Technology. You can also join Association of Marine Science and Limnology and Oceanography. You can also read about Pioneer Women in Oceanography or Women in Oceanography. There's also an organization for women's science for the developing country. You can also be part of a member. There's also an association known as the African Academy Award. Women can get involved. There's also the World Academy of Sciences, which young people can join. So there are a series of networks, and we want to share this information with our young women in marine science in Africa, starting from West Africa. I am a member of Nippon Foundation Partnership for Observation of Global Oceans. It's a network. I'm alumni, and you can also be part of it. I'm also alumni for International Max Planck Research School for Global Biochemical Cycles. So there are lots of networks, there's a lot of links which we can join to increase women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to solve societal problems, which is interdiscipline, which involves interdiscipline or critical thinking. The call is ours to act now with the international community. Man does not live in isolation. We must work together as a community. So to conclude, I quote Mariam Michelle. It says that no woman should say, I am but a woman, but a woman. What more can you ask to be? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lila. So we've now had 5 presentations. I applaud every panelist for being very sensitive to time. So we now have plenty of time for questions. And I don't see any yet in the Q&A. Whoop, one just popped up. What specific lessons can we, students and scholars in the humanities and social sciences, learn from STEM fields' rich collaborative tradition? And this person is a anthropologist. This is Semeni Gebremariam. I probably have butchered that name. It sounds Ethiopian to me. So thank you very much for the question. Who would like to go first in responding to that? What can social scientists and humanists learn from the physical sciences and engineering?
Well,
go ahead, George.
I think, you know, we in the sciences and the physical sciences, particularly areas having to do with the environment, we have no choice. We cannot do it by ourselves. It's not like we can go into our study and just sit down and write a poem and circulate and everybody will enjoy it. We have to get together, work together, each one bringing their expertise and even sometimes their real human power to put to work to accomplish things. So I think also for the social scientists and the people in the humanities, it will be a good thing to collaborate, to work, if nothing else, to sensitize the rest of the world, the people who are not experts in their field, as to what they are doing, and even encourage young people to come into that field, and also to help to educate other people to appreciate some of the things that even physical scientists do. So I am the distinguished scientist of a NOAA-funded center, which is a consortium of several universities led by Howard to train people, to train graduate students and undergraduates in areas of interest to NOAA, which includes weather forecasting and severe weather and other things like that. So we involve social scientists in this program. So they help us to develop ways to communicate, forecasts and other things for the public to understand it better and to respond better. So we need to work together, even between physical scientists and social scientists, to advance society. Let me stop here.
Wonderful, thank you. Go ahead, Aline.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add, I think one thing that's worked for us, so in fluid dynamics in my field, it's not always as much collaboration as Charles mentioned, but the key has been leveraging annual meetings. So if you go a typical conference and then even starting as a small group and building that and see where it goes, that could be a good way to try to create, the start of a network just by leveraging the conferences. So I just wanted to add that.
Great suggestion. I think we heard, going back to the question about engaging humanities and social sciences, George, I think you did an excellent job of weaving many sayings and readings that inspire, help lead to inspiration. And I think your whole point was that we're not going to get the acceptance and of dealing with climate change, for example, unless we inspire everyone. Did you want to add a comment to the question?
Yes, I do. First, I entirely endorse everything my colleagues just said, but I think Lila mentioned Newton saying that he's still on the shoulders of giants. Science has a pyramid structure, and it's a very undemocratic activity. A few people, we are fortunate, all of us, to be scientists. We live, everybody would like to live the way we do. If it hadn't been for the virus, we'd be jet setting, we'd probably all now be in Ghana and so forth. But we're heavily dependent on a solid base. And unless we have people interested in science, even though they're not going to be scientists, we're going to flounder. What happened worldwide in this past year, especially, not just in Africa, in the US and Europe, is the public seems to have lost faith in science. And it's really our job to install that. I'll just give one, what I consider example. When Mandela became president of South Africa in the early 90s, he was faced with the immigration of something like 1 million people. They were all highly educated, practically all white, all young. And South Africa today faces a very serious problem. The parents of those people stayed behind, they're retiring, and there's no replacement in sight at South African universities for them. We simply have to encourage. So what Mandela did to stop the exodus, he chose a peculiar field, as opposed to a common, he chose sports. There was a World Cup in rugby taking place in 1992 in South Africa. And he decided that he could unify his country if the rugby team would win the title. And in South Africa, rugby is a complicated game in that it's idolized by white people and detested by black people. Black people, their sport is soccer with a round ball. White people play with a oblong ball. And so Mandela had a tough time trying to persuade the black population to participate in this game. And there's an interesting movie, Invictus, that Clint Eastwood made about that event. And what Mandela did was to democratize rugby. He had the rugby players, the well-known ones, go to the slums, teach the game. Unless you know the rules of the game, unless you know the star players, you know the strategies, you cannot take an interest. At the moment, we've lost our base. We've lost the public who should be supporting science. Many of them won't wear masks. I mean, they simply do not understand really basic elements of science. What I would like to see, everybody should know why summer is warmer than winter. Everybody should know why our planet is habitable. It's because we are interdependent that it's habitable. We depend on each other. And until we can make the public aware of that, we're not going to succeed in attracting more people to science. The few of us who've succeeded, we indeed standing on the shoulders of giants. Many of those giants are not scientists, but they are strong supporters of science. So I want to emphasize that in addition to forming groups and so forth, we really have an obligation to be in contact with laymen, to explain to them, this is the most amazing planet. It's the only one known to be habitable. We should at least know why it is habitable. I hate to say this, I certainly don't understand the excitement about going to Mars or looking for life on some distant planet, maybe light years away, when we can't take care of this one. So anyway, this is basically a plea to democratize science the way Mandela might democratize rugby.
Wonderful example. Thank you, George. We now have many questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to try to go through them in order. One colleague asked about extending summer schools to East Africa and Uganda. All of our examples were West Africa. How will we expand these networks? I think Eileen mentioned one way to get involved, and that's through scientific societies that are international or regional. But what other suggestions would you have for how to expand these networks to other parts of Africa? Who wants to take that? Ryan, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I would like to say something on that one. And thanks for the question, Stephen. So, you know, that's the STEM core idea that I have. And, you know, is that, so the questioner actually asked specifically about Uganda, as I recall. So if you had someone in Uganda that said, I would like to have a summer school in materials science, let's just make that up. And then they had a partner at a, say, a US institution, then if a STEM core existed, then that was well funded, then they could set up a school under that umbrella. And part of my idea is it's kind of an efficiency thing, that there's all kinds of great ideas that people want to have this school on this topic here and this school on that topic here. I could be wrong, but I imagine if you went to a funder and said, we have to change the world, we need hundreds of these things, instead of trying to get 100 different small individual grants, just get someone to say, we need hundreds of these kinds of things, and set up a structure. And then you just have to have partners. You have to have one partner in Africa and one partner, say, in the US, and then of course lots of enthusiastic others to join. But, you know, a couple champions who will do most of the organizational work, and then others that join, and then you just take off. I hope that makes sense. And I think it comes into another comment on funding, that, you know, funding is a huge barrier. For sure, funding is a huge barrier. Again, I could be wrong, but I think if you found the right, you know, billionaire who said, I want to change the world by funding lots of these things, then that might be more efficient than each of us trying our smaller efforts individually.
Yes, and that's what's wonderful about the STEM core ideas. It's a general model, that can be used in many fields. Funding has been mentioned by a couple of the questioners and certainly was raised by, I think, every single panelist. It's a big, big issue. You know, I have some ideas about funding. I think Africa Week was set up to help share the outstanding things going on between University of Michigan and Africa that require funding. I think there are many ideas that you've presented. One of the things that in my experience, funders frequently like is supporting fellows, scholars, fellowships. And there were many ideas for that. And there are many, many networks and organizations. Panelists, Dr. Akita has been sharing some networks with the panelists that exist. So there are many opportunities for people to join networks, but specifically the questions about funding pertain to research funding as well as funding for these kinds of collaborations. I think some of you mentioned where you've gotten funding from the U.S. National Science Foundation, but are there other ideas that we should be sharing in addition to the idea of identifying individual donors? Go ahead, Aline.
I mean, I mentioned a little bit master's students. To me, this is, I think, when we talk about research, and I think there's definitely always a need for PhD at some extent, but I think master's students would come from Africa could really benefit going back, really benefit the continent, and would benefit us as well, I think, and our students. And so I think thinking about creative model of tuition waivers, I don't know if you can say tuition waive, having some structure like this, I think would really be helpful. And Ophelia Weeks from University of Liberia had a system with Florida International in a university where University of Liberia would pay the stipend of a student, but FIU would waive the tuition, and students would be just admitted, no, just straight on. But then having the collaboration between the two institutions to help provide some funding for living for the students once in the US, and having the US institution waive the tuition. I think that was an interesting model, and it seems it was working. I mean, that was put in a few years ago. I don't know the numbers or anything, but I think U of M could potentially do something like this. I don't know how scalable this is, but to try to get the pipeline going and have those students go back to their country, I think we need to think about also the students, not just the research funding as well, I guess.
That's an excellent suggestion, that the partnerships created by the University of Michigan could include some funding mechanisms that would stimulate the back and forth activity. That's a great idea that we should do something with. Any other suggestions on this topic of funding? Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I mean, I sound a bit like a contrarian. We all regret the inability to get together physically and see each other, but we shouldn't overlook that one of the small advantages of the virus has made us aware of the power of Zoom and meeting in groups, even when we're very far apart. And I think it is a brand new opportunity for education that we shouldn't neglect, that we can influence far more people. Now, unfortunately, the right wing and people we never mostly regard as opponents, they've used it very effectively to form groups of people who communicate and reinforce each other and so forth. And I think we should put it to positive use, the availability of Zoom, of the internet, superb lectures and so forth. And that's what Brian and I hope to do between Cape Town and Ghana in the coming few months. Can we get those students interested in each other, in their local conditions? They have to take pride in what they experience, their climate and so forth. But anyway, I want to make a case that if we want to reach large numbers, we should take advantage of the new opportunities available.
Yes,
Yes,
if I may.
great. Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Yes. So as long as we cannot create new funding, but there are funding opportunities out there. That's what I was trying to say. And I encourage, one thing I always tell young people: anybody can lead, but everything needs someone to initiate it. So the funding opportunities are there. They are not enough by any means, but it takes effort to find them and actually to sit down and write the proposal. None of them is easy. You have to sit down and write proposals. I spend a lot of my time, my personal time, morning, evening, Sunday, Saturday, writing proposals. So many of these things that I've shown that we've been able to do, we are done through sitting down at odd hours writing proposals to get funding. Sometimes the funding is very little, like the one I got from COSPA was something like, I don't remember, less than 20,000 US dollars. And I used it to fly all of these lecturers and the students to the same place to do the capacity building workshop. So for instance, the person who asked that question about East Africa, you may decide, okay, I'm gonna make it happen in East Africa. And then you yourself, even if you're still a student, can begin to look for opportunities and then invite other people to join you, write a proposal, submit the proposal. Sometimes it's not selected. I've written many that were not selected. And sometimes they are selected, then you make it happen. And then it will, once it gains traction, it will attract other interests and other suggestions. And also I wanted to say, that's the need, that's the, what we're talking about here is networks. So networks bridge funding and vice versa. So, through networking, you will get information about where these funding opportunities exist. And through networking, you will get other people who are interested in the same ideas as you. You can collaborate and seek the funding opportunities.
Excellent. Go ahead, Brian. We just have time for one more, I'm told.
Oh, okay, so I'll be real quick. One quick thing about funding students that goes along with what Aline said. It's a lot more cost effective to fund a student in-house in an institution in Africa, say, than in the US. So, with you using the network and sandwich programs, I think Aline was getting at things like this. You can train students cheaper in Africa than here. And so we're doing things like this. We have a student who goes to our summer school. He's a student at University of Ghana, but he still collaborates with some of us in the US, gets access to some of our facilities. And it costs 1/10 of what it costs in the US. And the US institutions, if they did more of this, would benefit from having a greater diversity of students. Just a thought.
Great, excellent. There's one more question specifically for Charles Ichoku, but I'm going to suggest that for the specific question, we ask you to follow up directly. I think contacts are available in the materials, and if not, people can contact me at University of Michigan, and I'll make sure it happens. We've had many outstanding suggestions here that I think apply generally, that through networks, you actually have more leverage for funding. Most funders will like the opportunity of scale in a network. And, maybe we should do an article on this to really bring all the information together, but there have been many suggestions about different sources of funding, different models for students, thinking about funding using the partnership to have the less expensive support of students in Africa and use the additional funding for bringing people together. Like Aline, I really value face-to-face. There's something you can't replace with virtual connections, but I really do believe that as George said, that we've learned a lesson that you can have much greater reach through virtual connections. And I'm guessing that they're going to be a part of everything that we do going forward. With our few minutes left, let's just go around to each panelist. Looks like we might have lost Lila, but each of you just take a minute for parting words, last thoughts to culminate this excellent session. And we'll go through in the original order, starting with Brian.
Oh, I didn't have something, let's see. I guess I'd say that I think events of the past year, the protests in the US have shown everyone the tremendous need to diversify. And I think it actually presents an opportunity that people want to see this happen. And so let's take advantage of it and try to get a lot more partnerships so that, in my field, you go to international meetings and there's not many Africans there. They're not in the meetings, they're not presenting science, they're not making decisions for my field, but let's change that. Let's take advantage of the moment. People want to see a change, let's do it.
Great, thank you, Brian. Charles.
Yes, thank you very much. So my recommendation is always, there are many organizations, well-meaning organizations that exist. We don't have to reinvent the wheel to make a very significant impact. So whenever we are thinking about something, we can look seriously to find those organizations that are already set up that we can leverage to make the impact. They exist in Africa, in all over the places. Let's not create very small things here and there. Let's find existing, established, trustworthy organizations, plug into them, collaborate with them to make impact.
Outstanding. 1 minute, George. Last comment.
I don't have any recommendations. I have requests. The effort that Brian and I are going to try, people in different parts of the globe contacting each other, I don't know what will work, what doesn't work, what goes viral. I don't own a cell phone, so I need advice. If you have any idea what it will take to get people in Accra interested in people in Cape Town, please let me know.
Great, thank you. Aline, last word.
I just wanted to bring up the student angle. I think, like George is saying, to try to democratize things, but I think leveraging our students' enthusiasm and passion for our field, I think it can be the spark that really helps other things bloom. So I think, we talk among ourselves with scientists and engineers, but I think really including students from the undergrad and outreach in schools and so on, it's really pivotal to make a change.
Thank you, outstanding. And Lila did put some links from her talk into the chat for everyone. So thanks to everyone. This is an outstanding session. I think you've made a very strong case for the importance of networks between US and Africa, all countries, to advance our fields of science. And thanks to all the participants who were with us. We have a next session in 30 minutes. So we hope that everyone will stay on. The next session focuses on COVID-19. It will be a very important session for the Africa Week. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.